Welcome back to Vow's Peace Camp, and our next session is a very hot topic in Canada, which is running for office, how to become a political candidate. And we have Rana Zaman, and she will tell us about the experience of running for office, the challenges, highlights, and what you need to do to start the process yourself. Rana is a Pakistani Canadian currently serving on 13 not-for-profit committees. She's part of Diverse Voices for Change Halifax, which is part of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities 5-city initiative to increase the number of women from diverse communities who are actively informed by and engaged in local government decision-making. So Rana regularly mentors youth and women to take leadership roles in community activities and causes, and has worked with politicians at the municipal, provincial, and federal level. Rana speaks on various subjects, including the Ivany Report, feminism, racism, and Islamophobia. She has published articles on some of these subjects as well. She's a strong leader and a voice for social justice causes, and she dedicates her time to giving back in her community, which she is grateful to be a part of. So Rana, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say and your experiences.
Oh, thank you so much, Vanessa, and thank you to you and Val for giving us the opportunity, and especially me, the opportunity to share my experiences in the political field, and especially as a minority and a person of color and female. So I'm going to start off with just defining a few things, because when you asked me to participate and speak about the political and the feminism viewpoint in politics, I thought, well, I'm going to do my own homework and see what that means. So I went through different sites and I've taken out the various quotes and put them together to create what the definition is, and then I'll explain the process. So I'm just going to read very quickly. Political feminism. Feminism is a relatively new force in politics. It addresses the underlying assumptions that make politics a male-dominated discipline and seeks to improve the position of women within it. We will focus on feminism as aiming to improve the status of women. Now, politics is also a broad term with many definitions, and many academics restrict politics to public activity, but feminists frequently extend the definition to cover power relationships between private individuals. Now, under this definition, women's roles in society and the home are political. Feminist thought can be broadly defined as the ideology of trying to advance the social role of women. A variety of movements of feminist ideology have developed over the years, and they vary in goals, strategies, and affiliations. They often overlap, and some feminists identify themselves with several branches of feminist thought. So you don't need to pigeonhole yourself in one. Traditionally, feminism is often divided into three main traditions, usually called liberal, reformist, or mainstream feminism, radical feminism, and socialist Marxist feminism. Now, mainstream feminism as a general term identifies feminist ideologies and movements which do not fall into either the socialist or radical feminist camps. The mainstream feminist movement traditionally focused on political and legal reform. Now, mainstream feminism is often derisively referred to as white feminism, a term implying that mainstream feminists don't fight for intersectionality with race, class, and sexuality. Mainstream feminism has also been accused of being commercialized and of focusing exclusively on issues that are less contentious in the Western world today, such as women's political participation or female education access. Radical feminists sometimes criticize mainstream feminists as part of a system of patriarchy. Nevertheless, major milestones of the feminist struggle, such as the right to vote and the right to education, came about mainly as a result of the work of mainstream feminist movement, which emphasized building far-reaching support for feminist causes among both men and women. Now, Black feminism argues that sexism, class oppression, and racism are inextricably bound together. Forms of feminism that strive to overcome sexism and class oppression but ignore race can discriminate against many people. including women, through racial bias. Now, I'm going to finish off with a very important definition that was from a Combahee River Collective member named Barbara Smith's definition of feminism that still remains a model today, which states that, quote, feminism is the political theory and practice to free all women, women of color, working class women, poor women, physically challenged women, lesbians, old women, as well as white, economically privileged heterosexual women. Anything less than this is not feminism, but merely female self-aggrandizement. So I hope that puts it into context of, the different forms of feminism, and whatever you fall into, please keep in mind that each of us has to face different barriers because of our different intersectionalities. Now, the barriers I faced as a candidate, first of all, to even qualify, is to be seen as recognized as one that would be worthwhile, whereas my work had an impact enough to get noticed. There are different ways of getting involved in politics. For me, it was not something I planned. I was actually approached because of my community work that I had been doing. It had been quite successful, and it came to the attention of a couple of parties. And as a result, they contacted me and asked me if I would be interested. And not having any kind of wish to be involved in politics, the lure for me was, they said, Rana, the work that you're doing right now impacts a few hundred people at a time. If you were in the places of power, the policies that you would help bring about would impact thousands of people. And that was a very attractive lure. And I thought, okay, sounds good to me. I'll do it. Little did I know what that encompasses. Well, through very hard lessons, I've learned you're a shining model as long as you are not expressing any strong opinions about anything. You are the perfect candidate if you are basically almost perfect, that you've never said a word, you've never, and for some women, apparently not even had some considered inappropriate pictures in other people's minds, such as boudoir pictures. A recent candidate was removed because of that. Like, for women, there's an extra layer of being almost inhumanely perfect. So I think in the future, candidates are literally going to be babies because they have no social media presence, they have no personalities, and they've never uttered a word. And they will be standing up as your candidates because everyone else becomes victims of cancel culture. And that is our own fault, because we empower, certain powers that be, and we jump on the bandwagon to literally destroy people's lives because of something they might said have done. And in some cases, it could have been when they were young teenagers. And we hold them accountable as adults for that. Does that mean there's no growth? You're not allowed to make a mistake and move on? Well, if that's the case, why is it our politicians that are doing mistake after mistake still in power? So think about that. So the challenges of being a candidate for me, as I said, are different than yours. But at the end of the day, I would say it's an experience you should get involved, and more importantly, involve your children and the youth. Because the best way to understand the system is to demystify it. To demystify it, you need to get your hands into it. And it's not that difficult. You don't have to be a public face if that's what you choose not to be. You can be involved behind the scenes. So I would say, look around, choose the party of your choice, and just say, I want to help. You can start by volunteering. You can start by joining their EDAs, which is called the Electoral District Associations. They are the behind the scene people who, for the 4 years in between before campaigns, kind of prepare things, get things ready, do fundraisers for whichever candidate will arise in their EDA, and then they will support that candidate. They also are the ones who are in power in part of putting forward candidates. So, they will do a part of the vetting process and interview. So if you want to be a part of that process, then I would say get involved, because that allows you, especially if you're a person of diversity, to put forward members from your community as suggestions as good candidates. And until we actually get into those places of power and behind the scenes, you will never see a really truly diversified campaign happening until those candidates are suggested. For people of diversity and minorities, I say, see yourself in these places of power. Imagine yourself there. Do not limit yourself. Let your children dream of being there. Let them see those diverse faces on the board. So when they're driving by and they have those diverse faces that represent them, they can see themselves in those positions for the future. So it's important to have that level of involvement. Now, for those who are more outgoing and outspoken and are willing to put yourselves out there, and no doubt about it, you are putting yourself out there for all kinds of things. But again, it's an experience in itself. And some things I would say it is well worth it, and others I would never wish on anyone. So once you do put yourself out there, you have to go through the vetting process, which in this case, if you're young right now, start watching your media accounts, see the language that you're using, the advocacy. You really have to be very careful. And you kind of have to self-monitor yourself right now, because they will then do the vetting process and pick out things. If they're problematic, they will bring it to your attention, ask why or where. And if they're really problematic, they will just disqualify you as a candidate. So I would say prepare yourself in that respect. Be very honest and upfront, which I believe in. You know, if you made a mistake when you were 12, 14, 15, got caught shoplifting when you were 10, just be clear. I was 10 years old and I really wanted that dolly, you know, and whatever the reasoning, just be honest, because, you know, honesty should have its own reward is what I believe. But if you're upfront, then they hopefully cannot object, but in some cases they still have, even when you have been honest. So I really don't know which way to say. It also depends on the party and the people behind the scenes. It's important to align yourself with a party, I believe, that also sees you as an individual and a human being, and not just an asset to get them what they want. Because if that's the kind of party they are, then perhaps that's not where you want to be. What other process? So once you have decided to put your name forward, they will start the vetting, the interview process. Once you qualify, then they will do the vetting process. Then you will get a letter saying, congratulations, you're a candidate for the area. Now, for provincially, if you're in the area, you have to get about 5 people to sign to say they give you permission to run. They recommend double, get 10, because they have to be qualified electors. And for some reason or another, some signatures get disqualified, even for something as simple if they don't put their name exactly as it is on the ballot box. So if hyphen is there or not there, that might be a reason to disqualify that name. So they say double. Now, federally, I just finished today. We need 100 signatures. So 100 signatures from people living in the riding, and they recommend go and get 150, because there's going to be bound to be signatures that are going to be crossed out for one reason or another. And that is a hard process. For me, to be efficient, I rather than running around to friends and family all over the city with a sheet of paper, I thought it would be better if I went to public areas and stood there, and fortunate to have sometimes people join. Most cases I went alone, and I literally stood there asking people if they would endorse me. Sorry, they're not endorsing you. If they will give me permission to be part of the democratic process to run as the candidate of the Green Party. I had to identify myself, you know, so they knew. And I had to make it very clear, you are not endorsing me. You are not going to be voting for me. You're just saying, hey, yeah, I'm glad you're running. Here you go. Here's your opportunity, you know, to be part of the process. You will be surprised how many people will say no. And then how many people will feel also empowered to talk down to you? Now, I don't know if it's because I'm a woman of color and I'm a woman, or it's just that is their personalities, but you have to be prepared for that. Yeah. And after you get qualifications, and depending if you've ever taken stances on anything, you can also expect messaging and emails that are very derogatory, insulting, and discouraging. So I just basically just forward it to my campaign team and get their advice, and they say, well, either you block them or whatever. I'm just saying, prepare yourself. On the off chance, like I have been held accountable for language or wording, and I have gone through the worst of the process and the best of the process. I will say, if you're in the worst of the process and for one reason or another, you come in the public eye for a statement or your human rights stand or your stance on masks or no masks or anything at all, you're going to have people on the other side who disagree with you. And some of them feel like they have the right to degrade you and to basically terrorize you verbally, both in private messages and public messages. And they also feel like they have the right to take pictures of you and create memes of you with some very disgusting comments. All of things that I have been through. And it's like, why is she still smiling? Because I believe in the process. I believe that if there's something you really are committed to and you really want to wholeheartedly advocate for, then you give it your all. You give it your all till the day you're not able to give it up anymore for whatever reason. So because of my faith and my commitment to building a better society for, and if you would say not for others, you can believe in your hearts for my children. I have 3 children. I want to build a better society that is not just equal, but believes in equality, a society that has sustainability, which is what my children have taught me. One is vegan, one is vegetarian. So they have been my greatest educators. And also a future for all of us. If we don't have a planet that is sustainable, then we don't have anything. So these are the reasons we are running. The majority of people have their own reasoning, but that is mine. And that is the reason I keep coming back. My conscience does not allow me to sleep at night knowing my neighbors are going hungry or they're homeless. And while I'm blessed with a better life, and not because it was given to me, no immigrant is going to tell you, we come here and we get everything handed in a silver platter. Well, guess what? It's with hard work and commitment and not giving up and the opportunity. Sadly, that opportunity is waning for everybody, including people born and raised here and our own children. They're having difficulties. So the only way to change the system is to go in there and not become part of the system. Don't become a cog in the wheel. I like to say, be the wrench that needs to help repair the system by working with other like-minded people together. The other aspect of being a candidate is be prepared to ask for money. If you're a shy beaver, then this isn't for you, because I'll tell you, you're not going to get anywhere without money. Some great professor wrote, I think in his class, I read this somewhere, or that he said to his classroom, when I come back, I'm going to give you 3 ways to guarantee success in a political campaign, the 3 things needed. And when he came back, he wrote on the board, number 1, you need to be successful in a political campaign, money. Number 2, you need to be successful in a political campaign, money. Number 3, you need to be successful in a political campaign, money. Now I'm going to add a 4th, volunteers. Because you cannot be a one-man show, even with all the money. Technically you can, I know, because then you can buy the volunteers. You can pay your volunteers and they'll all come out to help in different capacities. And I know there's a lot of parties that do that. They actually have paid volunteers. So then I don't know how they call it volunteers. But so I guess he's right, money, money, money. That's going to get you a successful campaign. An example is our neighbor, Mr. Trump. It was a heck of a lot of money that got him advertisement, the opportunity to speak, present, and of course, his own personality that appealed to a certain group of people. That's all because of money and the ability to speak and get advertisement space. I really believe that if I had the money to be able to put out my messaging, my personal messaging, it would reach more people. Somebody says, and I hate to say this, it's about exposure and a popularity contest. The more you get out there, the more you're messaging out there, then the more it's going to, expose you. And definitely your messaging is going to resonate with many people of like-mindedness. And then it will also hopefully, inspire them to get up and vote. In many cases where many have given up, they do not vote anymore because they think nothing's going to change. And I say nothing's going to change if you keep sitting at home doing nothing. You got to get up and do your part. So I've covered volunteers, I've covered money, I've covered your squeaky clean background. What do you think I haven't covered? Any ideas, Vanessa or Lynn? No? Yes, go ahead, Vanessa.
I just have a question about the fees associated with running. What are the fees? Because I volunteered at the Women's Voter Congress, and the fees were actually identified as a major barrier for women for going through the process. So I'm just wondering, what are the fees? Because I know provincially and federally you've been involved. Do you know the fees associated with running? Just the money that they ask for.
So interestingly enough, I never learned about the provincial because I have an official agent, and if you have an EDA, Electoral District Association, then they provide those fees. They usually have done enough fundraising to cover that cost, right? And in this case, I believe for the federal, I had to put forward, I haven't done yet because I want to get the final number, I believe is $250. So it's quite attainable. And especially if you're doing fundraising, because now, believe it or not, they said for a federal campaign, I asked what's considered in order to have a winning campaign. And they said, if you want a winning campaign, you have to have about $100,000. Yep. $100,000 for a winning campaign. And for just a decent campaign, you should have at least $40,000 just to be able to have a decent campaign, because federally, the area that you end up running can be 4 to 5 times larger than in the provincial election. So I will give you an example. The provincial election that I also ran in had 17,000 roughly voters. Now on the federal level, we're looking at 80,000 plus voters. So now for me to reach all those voters, I have to spread my signs, my messaging. There's no way I'm going to hit those doors. And if I had the funding, then of course I'd want to put it in your traditional newspapers, on social media, try to get advertisement on television, other forms of media like YouTube. I had political adverts showing up in my YouTube videos that I was watching for fun, and all of a sudden, there's a campaign for a certain political party, and I'm like, oh wow, you guys are here too. But I could see how the messages would be resonating, and then you're like, well, I like what that person said. Someone with no funding, if they don't get to your door, how will you know what that person is saying? And more importantly, I would say, how would you actually get to know your candidate unless you get to talk to them? And that's usually not possible. So what ends up happening is a lot of people will end up just voting for the party. And I say, that's not enough. You have to vote for the candidate, because to this day, when you vote the party, the individual you end up voting for because of the party will fall into line. It's called toe the party line of whatever the leader decides. You want candidates who will advocate for what was promised you during the campaign. And an example would be proportional representation, electoral reform. We were promised that, and for 6 years, nothing has happened, and not a single candidate who was elected has gone against the party leader or held them accountable and said, look, we promised this. This is a campaign promise. How do I go back to my constituents when I go door knocking saying, vote for me again, when they're like, you didn't hold up these promises? So
can I just say that Nathaniel Erskine Smith Liberal from Beaches, East York, has voted against the government 8 times, even though he's a Liberal, and one of them was on the fair vote representation. I'm not aware if anyone else in the party did, and your point is very, very significant. We end up electing blocks rather than representatives on the whole. And the risk that he took voting against the government line is that they wouldn't perhaps sign his papers the next time he ran. And in his case, he probably got permission to vote against the party line because his electorate cares so much about that issue. And the Liberals don't want to lose it next time. But the thing is that they're not apparently afraid of losing other ridings based on not having attained that promise. So Rana, your point about wanting to have an advocate in the person you elect is really true. And it's also true they're taking a risk because they're supposed to fall in line. So, yeah.
Yeah. And this is thank you so much. I'm so glad. So let's just continue at this point. Please bring in anything you want to share as well. This is very important, education of the system and how it works and how your vote has impact. They have been fear mongering and saying do strategic voting because your vote it'll be wasted. Guess what? Your vote will never be a waste when you vote according to your heart, your conscience, and your values. And your vote is a public statement for change. So on top of that, your vote for whichever party you vote for gives them money for each single vote. Now, if their candidate gets 10% of the votes, so say 8,000 people voted in the entire riding, and if they got 800 votes, that's 10%, they would get half of their campaign expenses returned to them, to the party, to use for next election. So it helps build up their coffers. This is why the traditional parties are becoming more and more powerful, because they convince people to keep going back and forth, and it doesn't give the smaller parties an opportunity to grow because the funding is not there. And also that public image of they're not growing fast enough. So your vote actually will have that impact, and it will help influence others more and more to vote differently. The other aspect of that people don't realize is majority of the parties, there's something called a whip. And I actually asked this question in this day and age, why do we have a position in the political, forum of someone that's called the whip, and they whip people into line? I think that's very derogatory. But the fact is that's exactly how it works. So like, Lynn said, if they go against the party, they are ousted one way or another. But I look at it this way. Was it the party who voted you in or the people? So if the people see that you're representing them and they realize that you're a true supporter of your constituents, then they should have sense enough to vote you back in. And if you're going to fall in line just to preserve your position, then you went in there for the wrong reasons. So I would be advocating for my constituents. And if I was booted out, great. At least I stood up for my values, but hopefully my constituents wouldn't let me, be booted out for standing up for them. And I know we're a nonpartisan thing, but this is part of the education process. So all of the political parties have a whip, except for the Green Party that I'm running for. And that's one of the reasons I chose to run for them, because I am a strong personality. I do have values that I stand up for, and I'm not willing to back down with them. So they need to know that up front. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to run again, and to uphold my values. Anything else?
Rana, I think that was an amazing presentation, and I did not know that about the Green Party. I knew about the party whips, but I did not know that the Green Party doesn't have one, and that they are the only one without one. So that is an interesting tidbit of information, I think. So thank you so much. Big round of applause for Rana taking the time to speak with us today. I know I learned quite a bit, and I'm really excited for your campaign. Like you said, I will just mention that VOW is a nonpartisan organization. But we were really, really happy that you were able to talk about what it takes to become a political candidate, a reoccurring theme that came out was tough skin for running and being out there in the publics. And I think that's really important for people to understand, but hopefully not get scared off from the process either, because like you said, if you are committed to it, it is worth it. And if you have any final words, after that, we'll move on to Lynn's session.
My final word is the illusion of power. Believe it or not, the real power is behind the scenes. It is not the leaders. It is not your candidates, unless those candidates are very strongly outspoken and will fight the inner mechanisms. But the real power is the one that's hidden behind the scenes, and that power maintains the status quo. So until you actually recognize and support the candidates that will go behind there and say, we are not going to be your puppets, basically. We are advocating for the people, and this policy is not for the people. This is for the select few. Nothing's going to change. And I'm going to say we need to educate each other. Please go out and educate your friends, your family. If you learned a few things today, let them know. And I know this is an expression, people are sheeple. In some ways, yes, but it's because they're not aware. I mean, I consider myself a reasonably intelligent person, but honestly, I was not aware of the political system until I actually was involved in it. Because for me, I thought far more smarter people know what they're doing, and I don't know very much, and I'm going to trust them. Well, I've been trusting too many people, and they have betrayed that trust. And we have to realize that we are upholding that system when we, number one, don't vote. Number two, we don't educate ourselves. Number three, we give in to fear mongering. And nothing's going to change. For 150 years, you're doing the same thing, and you have even a slogan for it. It's time to break that slogan and make the change. And sometimes you have to be brave and bite the bullet and vote for, regardless if you think they're going to win or not, you vote for them because that's your public statement. And then the next time around, you will see the growth. And honestly, put your money where your mouth is. Start supporting those people. Don't just go out and give them that vote. Actually go actively, organize, make it happen. The most powerful thing that people have is their ability to organize and come out in great numbers. You can take the system down. And I'm going to say this to the young people. My God, you people are so powerful. You are so aware. Your generation is incredible. But you just don't understand how strong and powerful you are, that if you went out and voted, you organized, you would change the face of politics overnight. Literally, because that's what it takes, that overnight vote, for the young to come out and vote. So take that power and fly with it. Stop hesitating. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And just before I start my session, I'll just say a few really key things, some of which you touched on and others I just want to make sure we add. When the percentage of women elected in a parliament reaches a certain level, I think it's got to be at least 33%, the quality of decision making, the framework that decisions are put in, the outcome, and also the tenor of that parliament changes. So women change parliament when they're in there. And there was a time when women didn't have the vote, and women fought to have the vote. We have the vote, so now let's use it. And similarly, youth, not young enough, and there's a number of initiatives to take the voting down to age 16, which I think would be a real big improvement, because for youth, this is about your future. So, and I have heard from statistical analysis in Ontario that if youth voted in equal numbers to older ages within the voting population, we would not have Doug Ford as premier in Ontario. Youth didn't, not enough youth voted. Many youth did vote, but the percentage is not as high as it is for other age groups. So anything you can do to motivate other youth to get out. And the other thing is to get involved in the campaign, volunteer, put up signs, call people, help the candidate that you want to see win go. Because even if they don't win, they've participated in all candidates' debates, they've spoken on the radio, they've raised the issues of concern, and they've changed the narrative of the election. So it's our democracy, and if we don't get involved, it suffers, right? Now, it would really help a lot if we could get rid of first past the post and get proportional representation. Countries that have proportional representation have a far more responsive government, responds much better to what public concerns are. And so the problem with it, I'm glad you brought up that the power behind the people that you see. So it's not Trudeau making the policies or the other Liberal MPs. It is very much the backroom boys, and they are usually boys. So and donors. So the fact is that when you see someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the US, how did she get there? Or even as far as Bernie Sanders managed to get, how did he get there? He didn't get there with corporate backers. He got there with small donations from millions of people. So the small donations add up, and they are really needed in these political campaigns. If you have somebody you believe in, you get most of that money back because of the way that if you pay taxes, the way the tax system works. And those small donations add up, because otherwise it's the big donors that pay the maximum that determine who can get $100,000 and win in that area. So never underestimate your impact by voting, your impact by getting involved in the campaign, your impact by contributing, and your impact by motivating others to get involved. And don't give up when you don't win, your candidate doesn't win, because you are still mobilizing power pressure. And the winning candidate will understand that strong, challenging campaigns are sending a message from the people that they then have to represent. So there is pressure on that, especially in what we call swing ridings, which may go back and forth between different parties' representatives. They're very attuned to what it is that determines the vote. This is the opportunity we have to make an influence on our future. And it's so important. And I'll just add that right now, the climate is so important, so that the climate is really the election issue this time around. Not to say that peace is always an issue, and we need to address it, but there is a lot of concern about climate, and it's absolutely crucial that we be acting effectively on that in the next few years. So I hope everyone will go out and vote. And thanks, Rana, for telling us what it's like to actually be a candidate. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Rana, and thanks, Lynn, for adding on to Rana's session there. And I think we're gonna go right into yours. So Lynn, you will be covering political campaign building for success. So a similar topic, but a little bit different. So we'll look at what you need to know about framing the issue, analyzing the root cause and barriers to change while considering a spectrum of allies, and finally, moving public support for your campaign. Lynn is a mediator and trainer in conflict resolution. She has trained peace teams in conflict zones with Nonviolent Peace Force and Peace Brigades International. A Quaker and mother of 2 and grandmother of 3, Lynn is also co-chair of Climate Fast. She works on the climate emergency crisis through Climate Fast and through VOW's Demilitarize, Decarbonize campaign for a just and peaceful, safe climate future. So welcome, Lynn. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I will just say that I began my social change work really as a teenager. So the Quaker community had a camp where, just like we're doing the camp here today, we talked about issues of the day, including the civil rights movement at that time. It was the 1960s, and anti-war, anti-Vietnam War at that time. And I became convinced that individuals can make a difference, and even more than individuals, social movements can make a difference. Social movements are built from individuals who get involved and follow other people to get involved. So I then, in my 20s, spent time with Movement for a New Society, in Philadelphia. And that movement led to Training for Change, which is an initiative that provides social change training all over, and also the New Society Publishers, in case you ever see those books. That was all part of this movement called Movement for New Society that started in the 1970s. That was in the 1970s. And I would very much like to see a growing movement. People need to understand that change can happen, but it isn't enough to wish for it or even just to talk about it. And even just to educate. The education is very important, as our earlier speaker was talking about, education about climate, talking about climate, those are very important, but they don't necessarily get you the results you want without very focused campaigns. And one of those very focused campaigns that Voice of Women is involved in right now is the No Fighter Jets campaign to highlight to the public where as much as $77 billion of tax dollars is to go instead of to the programs we actually need for a safer, a more secure future. So that campaign has used a number of strategies so far to build that campaign. I'm going to talk about the strategies from some other examples today. So the overall framework that we learned about when I was in Philadelphia with Movement to Society, and by the way, we didn't learn anything about political organizing. So the whole piece that you just did, Rana, they had kind of given up on political organizing at that time and had the view that you can get any government to do what you want them to do if you sufficiently organize on your issue to build critical public support. Now, it certainly helps if you, like, I think to try and get something from the Trudeau government is very different than it was under Harper. Under Harper, we may be nonpartisan, but you look at the Harper government and it was not responsive to the issues that we wanted to raise. So it can be harder or easier, but you still need an effective campaign that you build up public pressure with. And I think it's really important to learn about political organizing in terms of elections and government, as well as citizen organizing, which is what I'm going to talk a little bit about now. So let's just look at some of the components of a successful campaign. I'd really like to know from people on the call, if you wouldn't mind putting something in chat or put an asterisk in the chat if you want to talk, and just say, what is a campaign that you've noticed has done something that was successful, has overcome some kind of barrier or obstacle to move an issue forward, or what is a question you have for this topic today? So I'd just like a little input from people there, so I'm not just talking in response to some of that. If anybody would venture forth. Yeah. The last note I see is from Melissa, is actually for Rana. It's a good one about make ripples, make waves, make earthquakes. And I think that applies to all the social change work that we can do. Vanessa.
Sure, I'll give it a crack. I was, and I'm still interested in the I Can Cities appeal. I think it's a really interesting initiative because currently right now, Canada is not willing to sign on to the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. So I think it's interesting that people are organizing now at, municipal levels to try to get cities to, in a way, try to go around the government's unwillingness to sign on to the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And I thought that was an interesting take. I don't know.
It's an example. It's a very good example, Vanessa, because it's an example of finding a point of pressure. And the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty campaign is using that same point of pressure, which is municipal governments sending a message to the federal governments that can be pushed then to act in support of international movement forward. So in the example of the nuclear weapons, it's cities saying, we don't want the impact of a nuclear so-called exchange. We see how vulnerable our population is, and we want to see nuclear weapons made illegal. So the politicians at that level don't have to deal with the pressure from US or NATO. And so perhaps they're easier to put forward what they actually think and what their citizens actually want. And it adds to visibility for the issue. It adds to pressure for action on the issue. And it's an example of where we have to make our pressure, citizen pressure, bigger than pressure from the corporations, pressure from NATO, pressure from the US. They at a certain point, the governments will respond. So for example, we didn't so-called openly support the war on Iraq. Why didn't we do that? Because massively, the Quebec population, I think it was as much as 90%, were opposed to our intervening. And across the country, it was 60% opposed to our intervening in Iraq. So public opinion made it pretty much impossible for Chrétien to back that war because he didn't want to lose seats the next time. So it's an example of where massive public awareness and polling numbers can really make a difference to politicians' decision. And so the pressure that can come from cities in that campaign, the city's campaign for the nuclear weapons abolition is quite significant. So it's a matter of finding the point of pressure on the decision makers you want to influence. And then how can you build up for that? You know, you can do that with petitions, for example. You know, I want to just say that a group of people can make a huge difference, even if they've never done it before, by organizing with some awareness of how to put that pressure on. So there was a proposal for a casino in Toronto, and lots of people did not want a casino in Toronto, but to organize a campaign to beat the moneyed interests that were behind the casino was a challenge. And 5 women did it. They'd never organized a campaign before. They rallied to get faith leaders on board against a casino. They also took on innovative strategies, including putting pressure on the councillors who had to be affected by getting signs put in the area where they lived or in the area where they had their office. There would be signs, so the neighbors would have that up. The neighbors would be talking to the representative and putting a lot of personal kind of pressure on. So you might not be able to put signs across the entire ward or riding, if you're talking about, but if you go to where that person is influenced and put them there, it adds to pressure. So there were a number of kind of innovative ways that they went to, got to apply that pressure. So I was going to talk a little bit about a campaign against a dump site in Ontario called Dump Site 41 that was going to pollute water, the water table underneath, which is feeding people, you know, for hundreds of miles around the aquifer. So how did they do it? Well, those people who were concerned, first of all, put on a weekend event at which they invited people from outside to come. And actually water protectors came from a nearby Indigenous community and lit a sacred fire. So that weekend event was held. And at the end, the Indigenous people said that the sacred fire did not want to go out. So then it became an occupation of the land that was slated to become this dump site. And then the organizers, a small group of local organizers, went out and they got the Council of Canadians to get involved. And then they put on a whole festival at a nearby farmer's field, and hundreds of people came to that festival. There was also a walk to protect that land. There was a bike ride to take water samples to the Ministry of the Environment. So that got publicity to get in the paper. There was an op-ed in the paper by David Crombie, who was the former mayor of Toronto. So a real opinion leader. So looking for opinion leaders who are going to make public statements. And ultimately, the decision makers, which were the local council, were influenced enough by this that they took action. There was also a campaign against a mega quarry. So I'm giving you a couple of local examples because in a way you can see from local examples, the success is going to be easier if you can mobilize on a local issue. When you're looking at global issues like nuclear disarmament and climate, that is a much bigger question, and you've got to take the same principles we're talking about, but you've got to extend them across the globe. So that requires a whole nother level of organizing and putting pressure on. But these local examples are good in terms of looking at creative methodologies. So for example, the proposed mega quarry, which would have been 1/3 the size of Toronto out in the farm fields of Ontario, was fought in the basis of getting people out to the site to see it, to see the potential impacts. They did a food festival. It was called, what was it called? Foodstock. So come on out and participate in Foodstock. And they had famous chefs all in the woods in their little stands, and people went around and sampled food from these chefs. And then they did an event in Toronto called Soupstock, which is the same idea. You say, these are farms, this is producing potatoes, we want to go on being farms, don't want to be dug up to be a mega quarry. So you put that choice very directly out to people with creative campaigning methodology, and often you will see public opinion shift. Ultimately, the money powers that were behind the quarry decided to withdraw and give up, because I think what happened in the end is that the province was forced to call for an environmental assessment into the project, and the money that was behind that project, which was from a hedge fund in the US, they didn't want to go through an environmental assessment. That was going to be a lot of work and they might not win. So they actually just pulled out and left. So ultimately, when you get your pressure up to a certain point, you can get the change that you want. So I was going to just show you, let's see if I can share my screen. Yeah, I'm going to need Vanessa to make it possible for me to share my screen. Okay. Okay, I just got to find the one I want. Sorry, it's not showing up right now. Let's see. See it right there. There we go. Okay, so when you're in a campaign, I'm sorry that this is kind of a lot to look at, so I'll leave it up for a few minutes and just walk through it. But this is what's called the spectrum of allies and opponents, it says here. So when you really pays to analyze the conflict that you're dealing with and figure out who's with you and who's against you. So the allies would be who's with you. You can see that on the left-hand side, it says active allies and organizations. And then next to that are passive allies. Passive allies would be people who believe in your cause, they're with you, but they're not actually doing anything about it yet. Then you often have a very large proportion of the public that is in the middle. They're just disengaged. They don't know very much about it. They may be friendly or unfriendly, but they're not strongly involved in one way or another. So that is where the education piece is really important that was talked about earlier today, because people won't move from that middle unless they understand what the issues are and why they need to move. Then you've got passive opponents, people who are like, let's say we're taking the fighter jets. They're like, well, you know, Canada needs to be able to defend itself. And that's just their belief, but they're not active on it. And then you have active opponents who are going to try and discredit what you're saying, undermine, weaken your leadership, and make it impossible for you to achieve your goal. And they usually will ramp up if they see that you're being successful. When you know they're fighting back, you know you're making progress, actually. So the question here is, how do you move more people over to the active ally position, or from passive opponent to being in the middle, or maybe even a passive ally because they understand things differently? So the point is that your campaign should be designed to try and move people on the spectrum until you have sufficient number of allies to win. And change does happen when you have enough people who are actively engaged and willing to take risks for that engagement to make change. Now, I don't know. I have to look at British Columbia right now and say, I don't know why the heck there haven't been enough people so far to get the British Columbia government to stop permitting logging of ancient forests, because we're heading to the largest number of arrests in Canadian history, the largest demonstration, even bigger than Clayoquot Sound was back in the 90s, in protecting old growth forests. So I don't know why it hasn't reached a critical tipping point, but it will reach a critical tipping point. One of the things that's happening right now is the federal government is trying to see if they can come in and help protect that land. So the issue's been raised, and even if BC government is still not responding, other levels of government may come in and pressure it. You've made it a big issue, and you've got the middle, they're with you, even if they're not right out on the front line. The understanding about old growth forests is all across the province, no question about that. There's a lot of pressure there. It's important to know who your opponents are. So the mega quarry issue that I gave you, the opponent was this hedge fund in Boston, based in Boston, so outside the country. It was easy in a way to make that an enemy of the hedge fund, and to kind of rally other support from other levels against that hedge fund to get them to, in the end, draw back. And one of the things that can affect your opponents are questions of reputation. So if there's any kind of scandal in the work that you're doing, backroom deals, people are making money where they shouldn't be, if you can expose the light on that, you can have more people become in the middle or an ally with you. So that kind of research that brings those things out are really important. And I guess I would like to just add that there are roles for everyone in a social movement. So the research is equally important to the education, is equally important to the frontline activism. There's not one that's above all the others. We really need all levels of activism. I just really want to say that an education alone, or a single action, like a single demonstration, we seem to be very big on single demonstrations sometimes, isn't going to be enough on its own. It needs to be a campaign, and you need to know when you're making progress, and you hit the milestone, and then you go on to the next one, and you need to bring a number of strategies together. But I'll just stop now and ask if there are any questions about it. See that I'm talking now a little bit about tactics that are aimed at your target. You need to know who the decision makers are that are in the way right now of achieving your goal, so that you can focus on moving them. So the more clear your analysis can be, the more carefully chosen your strategies and tactics can be, the more likely you are to succeed. So any comments or questions people might have about this way of looking at the campaign? I'm going to stop sharing. So if people want to, let's see if I can stop sharing there. Anybody wants to make a comment? Yeah, Hannah's making comments about the BC government, that she's living in BC. So they have become right-wing, building mega dams, subsidizing fossil fuels, that is the LNG, which is really terrible. So their emissions, climate emissions, are increasing rather than decreasing in BC. Yeah. So majority governments can often be problematic. Minority ones allow you more opportunity to pressure through the minority parties, pressure the main government. Any comments or questions on what I've shared so far? Janice, are you trying to speak?
I was going to hop in, but I'm a little hesitant because I've missed quite a bit of it, Lynn. I was away at another event for a bit. I was just going to ask you if you could give another example, but maybe you've already given plenty. I only heard the one about the I saw your graph, which is great. And then I heard about the resistance to the logging in BC one.
Well, I did talk earlier about the mega quarry, which you'd be familiar with because it was near the Unitarian camp. That was in 2012, proposed to be
Yes.
built there. And there I talked about identifying the, where it's coming from, this hedge fund in the US. So kind of that's the enemy, that's the external enemy, but you've got your local decision makers. How do you, and the government of Ontario was involved too. So you have to figure out what's happening at each level, local, provincial, federal. And in the end, that was put for an environmental assessment. And the hedge fund people didn't want to go through with, they might not win. And it's a lot of work to do that properly. Their operation, it was going to be 1/3 the size of Toronto, and it was going to use so much water from because they were digging down, to get the stone out. So it was ultimately defeated, but you wouldn't have thought you could defeat it in the beginning, because it's in a rural area, it's just a few local people. But by building those allies and building the campaign and getting the word out widely enough, doing things that get the issue into the media, and then focusing on your local decision makers. Yeah, so it was an excellent campaign and it was ultimately successful.
Thank you.
I had started by saying you need analysis, you need the research, you need to understand what you're up against. You need the vision and to be able to articulate the vision of how you want it to be, and understand the barriers that are getting in the way. So for example, Linda McQuaig just had a recent article in the Star about climate, and she said, you think we're a bunch of stupid human beings because we're letting this happen when it's killing our planet where we live. And she said, but actually we're not. We need to identify the fact that it's the fossil fuel companies that are preventing us from making the progress. So we have to target our efforts towards them, whether it's investment in fossil fuel companies, whether it's approvals that are given at the government level, which is why we're doing the non-proliferation treaty campaign. We want to take away their social license that allows them to get approved for new projects. So, it's a very interesting article that she wrote. You need to know who your opponent is that is keeping you from moving forward. So when it comes to peace, we're looking at the so-called defense industry that makes so much profit off of war, which we can now see in Afghanistan with the complete collapse of, 20-year trillions of dollars, top-down military operation that, of course, who didn't realize at the beginning that this was not going to work. It was never going to achieve a democracy with people involved and women free and so forth. It just was not going to get there. So we need that Department of Peace Building. We need that peace building approaches. And in order to get that, we're going to have to, this is an opportune moment. If we had the time right now, we're in the middle of an election, which makes it, I think, somewhat challenging, but it would be a great time for an op-ed to talk about how the opportunity was there in the 1990s to do something completely different in Afghanistan and to build up civil society rather than see it destroyed. So you analysis, vision, strategy. Your strategy is then taking the barriers and directing yourself to removing those barriers. There's the book on the nonviolent, Gene Sharp's book, and there's just a little handout called, what's it called? 199. I think it's something like 199 nonviolent strategies for change. And it's a very good little handout that lists all the different strategies you can apply to your issue. And groups like ICANN, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, they're using a number of those strategies. We also talked earlier about engaging youth, the importance of engaging youth. Yeah, so there's lots of strategies. I've got a few more written over here. Getting outside of your usual group, like allying with groups that generally work on other issues, and seeing how your issues connect, bringing them together is really important. Using art, creativity to deliver your message, that's important. Indigenous engagement was really important to dump Site 41 struggle. They set up a camp. They also brought in the principles like water is sacred and we're here to protect water. So bringing in overarching principles that all those people in the middle that we're trying to influence are going to understand and agree with. That's also important. Maybe I'll show you one more little handout if I can share again. Let's see if this one will come up. This one's very positive. It's one that we use in our climate education work. We have a program called Kitchen Table Climate Conversations, which it's climateconversations.ca is the website. And on that, you'll see all of our materials to do with educating people about climate and getting beyond the group that are considered environmentalists or social activists, and getting to the regular public that needs to understand these things in order to be able to influence their politicians, in order to be able to make meaningful changes themselves. Most people don't really understand what is needed to be changed in order to address climate. They're concerned, but they don't know what to do. So we promote these kitchen table conversations. And one of the parts of it is to share in these different ways why we think kitchen table conversations can be helpful. We could do them around peace as well. First of all, if I'm looking at the upper right on this right now, social action, collective action in groups is going to be more powerful than individual action alone. And people are going to be able to think differently about a topic after discussion with people that they know and care about, feel connected to, perhaps are influenced by, such as their friends, neighbors, family. So if you sit down together and you take a look at it and then decide to act together, that's powerful. If the actions required are simple actions, and that could be what you're choosing for your diet, how you transport yourself, whether you purchase offsets if you have to travel by air, simple personal things you can make, and voting, it would be a simple action that can make a difference also. Being in a supportive environment is really important. People feeling that they're not alone with the struggle, that when they try to make changes, they're not being judged. Very important for people not to feel judged. That people understand that that we can have a better quality of life with acting on climate than we currently have. It's better for air quality, better for our health, better for innovation, and also for job creation. So there's lots of really positive benefits from taking action. That would be the same for peace. If we put investment in peace in our communities instead of into military weapons, we'd be getting a lot of benefits that are better for the community. People need to understand when we're making progress. So how do we know that we're making progress? If I want to lower my own carbon footprint, how am I going to know that I'm actually doing so? So there are footprint calculators that can help people with that. Or you can see, we got together and we put a solar panel on a school in our community. We can see it, it's visible. So visible signs of progress help reinforce progress and kind of get the ball rolling on change. And stories of success. So individuals saying what they've done, what we've done in our community, show people what they can do in their community. So sharing stories of success is really important. People understand the world through stories, not just facts and figures. That isn't the biggest influence. Personal example can be quite a big influence. So those are some of the things. And there's a little video, which I do recommend listening to. This video, How to Transform Apocalypse Fatigue into Action on Global Warming. I don't know if I can actually get a link from this though, but you can find it on YouTube. If you put that title and you think about that title in, you can find it. It's just 15 minutes. And he talks about the 5 Ds that get in the way, as well as these 5 S's of success. So denial and distance and so forth. The Ds are equally interesting. So I do recommend that video. So I'm going to stop sharing because I think we're just about out of time. In a few minutes time, I think there's a break before the next session, but maybe share. Any comments or questions people might have before we wrap up? Oh, thanks, Vanessa. She's got the link and put it in the chat there for that video.
Yes, any questions or comments on Lynn's presentation? I saw that there was a couple great comments in the chat as well. So thanks for putting those forward. And I think the TED Talk is probably what we need right now. Apocalypse fatigue sounds about right. So yes, any questions or comments, discussion? We are going to take a little bit of a break before we get to Janice Alton's session on civil society and the UN, the VOW Connection, and the Commission on the Status of Women. So I'll just make that plug.
Can I make just one last comment before everybody goes, is that we often look at a problem and we don't know what to do about it. And I just would say, get a few people together and talk about it and see what you come up with, because the power of collective, collective sharing on these problems, and it's so much nicer to have it shared than to carry it alone. It made a huge difference to me when we started having climate groups, because I was worried about climate for probably at least 5 years before I found a group. So I could have started a group, but I was pretty busy with my kids and everything else in my life. And once I found a group, though, the burden is easier to carry when you have a lot of people, and you can be more creative and come up with things that are fun to do, and doing things together. The social aspect of it is also really important, which I hope we can build more on in VOW. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
I think that's a great note to leave on for our break. Heavy burdens require many hands. So I will stop the recording and we'll take a little break, and we will see you back here in about 15 minutes. Thank you, Rana and Lynn, for such an inspiring session. I know I learned a lot, and I hope to see everyone here again in about 15 minutes. Okay, bye for now.